Oh, where is St. George? Oh, where is he? Oh, he's out in his longboat, all on the salt sea. Oh, up flies the kite, down goes the lark. Oh, Aunt Ursula birthed, she had an old ewe, and she died in her old park. Oh. Those are the words from a song uh, that I used to hear at least once a year growing up, every May, every May 1st, sung on May Day. That's part of the celebration as the sun rose, but it's a part of a ancient tradition in a town called Padstow in England, um, where they sing that song every May Day, and it has those words in it, and it's like part of a riddle, and I chose to include it here at the beginning of my presentation on St. George because it was one of the first connections that I ever had uh, to the imagery or iconography of St. George, and the place that it came from was it's called Morris dancing, uh, something that my mother introduced me to when I was very young, and a tradition that's been passed down through many generations in English folk culture, people culture. I don't know exactly how you would phrase that, but it's an ancient tradition and an ancient riddle. And I wanted to explore with you guys today here the question of who even is St. George, and why is there a dragon and a maiden, and like, what's the whole story about, and why do we have the particular iconography that we have uh, around St. George, and and other symbols that are associated with him, and how significant those might be. Um, but we're going to get into a bunch of different topics here, but I chose for the first time to actually do a little preparation. Not necessarily my own research, but this is just some Wikipedia-ing to get some basic ideas. Uh, but also so that we could sort of all keep track of where we're at with the whole thing, because I've got multiple books to introduce you to and multiple different perspectives on this story. So we'll go through them one by one, and we'll see how it goes. So we're all going to answer the question together of who was Saint George. So this particular version, Saint George, that died in 303, probably after the death of Jesus Christ, was a Roman soldier of Greek origin who became a highly venerated Christian martyr, known for his faith and courage. He is famously mythologized as a dragon slayer and serves as the patron saint of England soldiers in various cities, with his feast day celebrated on April 23rd. Happy St. George's Day to all. Key facts about St. George. Life and death. Born in Cappadocia, modern-day Turkey, in the 3rd century, he was a member of the Praetorian Guard for Emperor Diocletian. He was executed in Nicomedia, or Lydia, Palestine, on April 23, 303, for refusing to renounce his Christian faith during the Diocletian persecution. The Legend of the Dragon. He is popularly depicted saving a princess from a dragon, or crocodile, in Libya, a story that became popular in the Middle Ages to symbolize the triumph of good over evil and protection of the faith. Significance. He is recognized as a martyr of the Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, Anglican Communion, and some Islamic traditions. He is considered a megalomartyr as a military saint. Patronage. Besides England, he is patron saint of Georgia, Ethiopia, Lithuania, Palestine, and various organizations such as the Scouts. Symbolism. He is usually depicted as a knight in armor, on a white horse, holding a spear and the white shield with a red cross, known as St. George's Cross. While historical evidence of his life is limited, his legacy as a symbol of sacrifice, virtue, and bravery, particularly during the Crusades, has made him a celebrated figure across Europe and the Middle East. Right? So, how old is the story of St. George and the Dragon? The story of St. George and the Dragon is roughly 900 to 1,000 years old in its narrative form, emerging in the 11th and 12th centuries. While St. George was a historical figure martyred around AD 300, the dragon slaying legend was added centuries later, becoming widely popularized in Western Europe through the 13th century, the Golden Legend, which I have here, which we will read after we go through just a little bit more on the legend of St. George and the Dragon. So, the earliest mentions. The earliest known written version of the dragon episode is an 11th century Georgian text. Iconography. Images of St. George on a horse, though not always killing a dragon, date back to the 10th or 11th century in Cappadocia and Georgia. The Golden Legend, the 13th century compilation by Jacques de Voragine, solidified the story of George rescuing a princess from the dragon in Selene, Libya, making it famous throughout Europe. Symbolism. The story was likely a medieval allegory developed to represent the triumph of good Christianity over evil, paganism, or the devil. I'm going to actually add one more for the symbolism. The allegory is metallurgical and has to do with Mercury and where you find Mercury. And there's a story. Let's see if I have more here before I get into this story. Okay. So there's an old story of a king. I think it might be related to King Arthur. It might have been his father. I can't remember who the story is about. But it's a king who has two dragons fighting underneath where he keeps trying to build his castle. And he keeps trying to build his castle. He builds it like 5 different times, and eventually the wizard comes and tells him that he has to kill the white and the red dragon that live underneath the castle, and then he'll be able to build his castle and be the king. And it has something to do with dragons. And dragons, the different metals that you come into contact with in the natural world, one of which produces mercury, which is needed for the alchemical process. And I believe that the allegory is related, and the symbolism across time, because it has to do with how you purify gold. And these originally would have been gilded in gold. So somebody knew how to do it. And there might have been a story about how they did it. And the story might have something to do with the Golden Legend. Might have something to do with a golden fleece. Might have something to do with, oh, what else have we got? The Fountain of Youth, right? The Holy Grail, the Philosopher's Stone. We'll get to that later. So let's see here. Where we got you? St. George, April 23rd, page 232. Let me pass it. Here we go. St. George, April 23rd. George comes from geos, earth, as in things like geodes and geography, and you know, that's your prefix, geos, earth, and urge, to work, right? Geo-urge, right? Earth worker, you could say. You could also say that he might be a miner, right? Somebody who works in a mine, right? Earth worker, right? That's what the name actually literally comes from, right? That is one who works with the earth, namely his own flesh. That's complicated wording. they like to they like to leave hints. But St. Augustine writes in his book of the Holy Trinity that good earth is found on the summit of the mountains, on the hills, and in the plains. The first bears good grass, the second grapes, the third the fruits of the fields. So too St. George was on the heights, for he disdained base things, and had the fresh green of purity. He was temperate by his prudence, and thus was permitted to share in the wine of heavenly joy. He was lowly in his humility, and therefore was clothed with the fruits of good deeds. Or George comes from Girar, holy, and Gion, battle, a holy warrior, for he fought with the dragon and with the executioner. Or George is from Girar, sacred, and Gion, sand, holy sand. He was like unto sand, for he was heavy through his great virtue, ground small through his humility, dry in his abstinence from the temptations of the flesh. Or George comes from Gero, pilgrim, Gir, precious, and Yis, counselor, for he was a pilgrim in his contempt for the world, precious because of his crown of martyrdom, a counselor in his preaching of the kingdom. At the Council of Nicaea, his legend was placed among the apocryphal books, for there was no certain account of his martyrdom. In the calendar of the Venerable Bede, we read that he was martyred in Persia in the city of Diospolis. Elsewhere, it was said that he is buried in Diospolis, formerly called Lydda, near Joppa. We read that he suffered under Diocletian and Maximian, the emperors, or under Persian Emperor Dicenius, in the presence of his kings. Here we read now, he was tortured by the prefect Dicenius under the emperors Diocletian and Maximian. George was a native of Cappadocia and served in the Roman army with the rank of tribune. A chance journey took him one day into the neighborhood of Salina, a town in the province of Libya. In this town, a deep lake as large as an ocean, there dwelt a horrible dragon, who many times had put flight to the men who came armed against him, and who was wont to prowl about the city walls, poisoning all who came within reach of his breath. In order to appease the fury of this monster, and to keep him from destroying the whole town, the burgesses had been offering him 2 sheep every day. But in time the number of sheep was so depleted that they were reduced to abandoning to him 1 sheep and 1 human being. The name of the youth or maiden was drawn in a lottery, and no family was exempt from the lottery. And the day that St. George reached the city, well nigh all the folks of the town had already been eaten up, and the lot for the day had fallen upon the only daughter of the king. Then this aged man, in the sloth of his despair, said, "Take ye my gold and my silver, and the half of my kingdom, but give me back my daughter, that she may be spared so dreadful a death." But his people were exceeding wroth, and cried, "Thou thyself, O king, hast uttered this decree, and now, when on its account all our children have perished, thou wouldst save thine own daughter from the law? No, let her perish, like the rest, or else she shall be burned alive with all thy house." And at these words the king burst into tears and said to his daughter, "Alas, sweet child, what shall I do for thee? And shall it not be given to me to see thy wedding day?" And after this, seeing that he still could not secure the safety of his daughter, he said to her, "Alas, sweet daughter, I hope to see my kingly children feeding at thy breasts, and now thou thyself must leave me, to be fodder for this horrid dragon. Alas, alas, my sweet child, I hope to invite all the nobles of the land to thy wedding, and adorn my palace with pearls, and to hear the joyous music of trumpet and tambours. And now, instead, I must dispatch thee to the dragon to be devoured." And he dismissed her with the last word, "Woe is my daughter, that I did not die before this day." The damsel fell at her father's feet. Tearfully sued for his forgiveness, and asked to become a Christian. And within a short time the prefect had him beheaded. St. George was then bound to a wheel, which was fitted on all sides with two-edged swords, but the wheel fell apart on the first turn, and St. George remained unharmed. Dacian then commanded that he be plunged into a cauldron of molten lead. But he made the sign of the cross, and felt no more the touch of a soothing bath. Then Dacian perceived how unraveling threats and tortures were thought to weaken him by flattery, and said to him, "Thou seest, my good George, how long-suffering are gods, that they bear patiently with thy blasphemies, and yet ready to visit thee with their favor at the first sign of repentance. Follow my counsel, then, brave youth. Have done with thy superstition, and offer sacrifice to our gods, that thou mayest have great rewards of them and of us." And St. George smiled and said, "Ah, why didst thou not speak to me in the beginning, instead of seeking to overcome me with torments? So be it. I am ready to obey thy counsels." Dacian, delighted with his promise, had the trumpet sounded and proclaimed that the people were to gather at the temple, where George, after long resistance, was about to worship the gods. The whole city was garlanded as for a festival, and thousands of people milled about the temple. And George, the moment he entered therein, knelt and prayed to God to destroy the temple and its idols forthwith. And instantly a fire fell from heaven, and consumed the temple, the idols, the priests, and the earth opened and swallowed up the remains. Saint Ambrose makes reference to this miracle when he says, "At a time when Christianity was a hidden thing, George, the staunch soldier of Christ, alone dared to profess his faith in the Son of God before all people, and the grace of God in return gave him such fortitude that he braved 1,000 menaces and 1,000 tortures. O blessed the venerable warrior of God! And not only would he not be cozened by the proffer of earthly power, but making game of his his persecutor, he destroyed the temple with all of its false gods." Thus spoke Ambrose. In this circumstance, Dacian again confronted George and said to him, "By what arts, miscreant, hast thou dared to commit such a crime?" And George retorted, "O king, thou art mistaken. Come with me to another temple, and in thy sight I shall worship the idols." "Ha," he replied, I divine thy ruse. Thou hast put an end to me, and thou hast done already to the temple of my gods. But, miserable man, said George, if thy gods are powerless to help themselves, how can they help others? Beside himself with anger, Dacian said to his wife, I shall die of discomfiture, for the man is stronger than I. And but she responded, Bloody tyrant, did I not conjure thee to persecute the Christians no more, because their God fought at their side? Know now that I am about to become a Christian. Astounded, Dacian cried, What, even thou hast fallen under their spell? And he had her hung by the hair and beaten with rods. And while they were beating her, she said to George, George, what thinkest thou will become of me, who am about to die, without being reborn in the waters of baptism? And George made answer, Doubt not, my daughter, that the outpouring of thy blood will be thy baptism, and will merit thee eternal glory. Then Alexandria, having besought the Lord, breathed her last. This is attested by St. Ambrose in his preface, who adds, For this reason, the queen of the pagan Persians has also shown mercy and received the psalm of martyrdom when her cruel husband had condemned her to death, although she had not yet been baptized. We may not doubt that she, crimson with the dew of her blood, was permitted to enter the portal of heaven and to possess eternal glory. The next day, Dacian commanded George to be dragged through the length and the breadth of the city and beheaded. And the saint prayed to God that whoever should implore his help might have his vow fulfilled, and the heavenly voice was heard saying that this prayer was granted. Then, his prayer finished, St. George was beheaded. This occurred in the year 287. As for Dacian, he was leaving the place of execution to return to his palace. The fire of heaven fell upon him and consumed him and his ministers. Gregory of Tours is related certain monks were bearing them the relics of St. George when they halted before a certain chapel, and they could not lift the casket containing the relics until they had deposited some of them in the chapel. When read in the history of Antioch during the Crusades, when the Christian hosts were about to lay siege to Jerusalem, a passing fair young man appeared to a priest. He told them that he was St. George, the captain of the Christian armies, and that if the Crusaders carried his relics to Jerusalem, he would be with them. And when the Crusaders during the siege of Jerusalem feared to scale the walls because the Saracens who were mounted thereon, St. George appeared to them, accoutred in white armor adorned with the red cross. He signed to them to follow him without fear in the assault of the walls, and they encouraged in his leadership, repulsed the Saracens, and took the city. So that's the account that they're referencing in the Golden Legend, which, to me, the problem that I have with a lot of this type of writing from history is that it's being done by essentially the Catholic elites years after the fact, and it's basically like a retcon. It's like a revisionist version of history, right? And they're trying to say that, oh, he was really, he was really one of our guys, right? He was one of us, right? But I don't necessarily know if the legend of George is just these guys, because it goes back before this was written, right? So we're going to go into a little bit of that as well. Okay. So this is 13th century, right? So the 1400s, right? When that's getting written, going back and looking, right? But when we looked at how old the story of St. George and the Dragon is, it's roughly 900 to 1,000 years old, right? which would put it kind of like 11, you know, centuries ago, or the 11th century. So 200 years before this was written, right? You have the stories of St. George and the Dragon. So I don't know how much we can take everything from there, but it is nice to have the representation that we can actually read it. But I do have another version, and that's where things kind of get interesting. So we will continue on. So while we were talking about that, we mentioned the St. George's Cross. We've talked about it, or it's been mentioned a couple times now. It's the symbol of the Red Cross, the four white squares, right? And what does that represent? What type of balance and whose blood and what does it do for you and all of the other things that go along with those questions. But how old is the symbolism of St. George's Cross? The symbolism of St. George's Cross, a red cross on a white field, is also roughly 900 to 1,000 years old. With roots in the 10th to 12th century crusades as a badge of faith, it was adopted as an English military symbol around the late 13th century and became the national flag of England in the 14th century. Origins 10th to 12th century. The red on white cross originated during the Crusades to identify soldiers. It was used by the Republic of Genoa in the 10th century and later by Knights Templar and other crusading orders. English adoption 13th century. Recorded usage in England dates back to the Second Barons' War, where it was used to identify soldiers at the Battle of Evesham. Patron saint, 14th century. St. George was declared the patron saint of England, replacing St. Edmund, and the cross was fully adopted as a national emblem, often featuring prominently as a badge of pride on soldiers' tunics. Formalization, 1552. The St. George's Cross was designated as an official, exclusive patron saint emblem. The symbol is also deeply associated with other places, including Georgia and the Italian city of Genoa, both which used it in their civic designs. Right? So it's a story about a guy who lived at one point in time whose name was Earthworker, right? Who defeated a dragon, rescued some kind of maiden, might have become king, right? That's what all of the stories and songs sing about, right? So keep that in mind as we continue, right? What is the connection, if any, between the St. George's Cross and the Knights Templar? The St. George's Cross, red cross on white, became intimately connected with the Knights Templar during the Crusades, particularly when Pope Eugenius III authorized them to wear a red cross on their white mantles in the 1140s as a symbol of martyrdom and Christ's blood. The emblem marked their role as warrior monks. Over time, this crusader symbol was increasingly associated with St. George, the patron saint of soldiers, and was adopted by English kings to symbolize both divine protection and national identity. Historical connection and usage examples. The Crusader uniform, 12th century. The red on white cross was adopted by the Knights Templar during the Second Crusade, 1145 to 1149, as a symbol of their pledge to defend Christendom and their readiness for martyrdom. Taking the cross, Crusaders, including Templars, wore white cloaks symbolizing purity, with a red cross representing the vow of crusade. Development of the symbol. While the Templars often used a cross pate, a cross with flared arms, It's kind of like Iron Cross, where they flare out at the ends. The symbol on a red cross on a white field became a general, widely recognized emblem of the Crusader from about 1190, often associated with the Templars. English adoption. King Richard I, the Lionheart, brought this symbol back to England from the Crusades. By the late 13th century, it was used by Edward I as a personal flag, eventually becoming associated with St. George and becoming a primary symbol of English identity. Templar symbolism. The cross indicated their dedication to the Crusades and was worn over their armor to signify that they were soldiers of Christ. Synonyms and related terms. The Crusader cross, used generally for crosses worn by crusading soldiers. Cross of St. George identifies the specific red cross on a white field. This one. Templar cross. Well, the Templars used a cross pate or pate. This is often used interchangeably with the Red Cross in popular history. The flag of Genoa and the Genoese cross. The Republic of Genoa uses this symbol to represent their patron saint, St. George, and it was used by English ships as a protection in the Mediterranean. Red Cross of Martyrdom, reference of the blood red color symbolizing the sacrifice of Christ. Key connections. Martyrdom, the red color symbolizes the blood of Christ and the sacrifice of the knight, which was a core tenet of the Templar order. Military saint. St. George became the unofficial patron of crusaders and a celestial knight who fought on behalf of Christian soldiers. Symbol transmission. The Templars and later English military adoption of the cross in the Holy Land helped solidify the status as a Christian crusader symbol before it was specifically linked to the flag of England. Note, while the Knights Templar were early adopters of the Red Cross, the St. George's Cross and a specific Templar cross are technically distinct heraldic symbols, with the Templars frequently using a cross pate rather than the simple straight-armed St. George's Cross. So sometimes it was used, and sometimes that's associated with them, but not all the time. Oh, right. Oh. Okay. What is the connection, if any, between the St. George's Cross and the Knights Hospitaller, right? Hospitals, or the idea of being hospitable. The primary connection between the St. George's Cross, red cross on white, and the Knights Hospitaller, Order of St. John, lies in their shared role during the Crusades as defenders of Christianity, with both using distinct, yet sometimes overlapping, red and white crosses to identify themselves, though the Hospitallers later became more commonly associated with the eight-pointed Maltese cross. Key connections and uses examples. Crusader identity. The plain white cross on a red background is believed to have been worn by some Knights Hospitallers in the Holy Land, similar to other Crusaders who adopted St. George's symbol. Distinction from the Templars. While the Templars use a cross pate, straight arms, the Hospitallers' flag had been described as a white cross on a red field, and the reverse of the St. George's Cross. So their flag was reversed. And they used a red flag with a white cross after moving to Malta. Symbolism in Malta. The Knights Hospitaller, Knights of Malta, used various forms of crosses. While the St. George Cross, sometimes confused with the Maltese Cross, the order used a white cross on red and later developed the eight-pointed cross as their official emblem. Evolution of symbols. The Red Cross was adopted by various European orders to signify their and the Hospitallers' devotion to the Holy Land. Synonyms and related symbols. The cross of St. John the Baptist, the flag of the Knights Hospitaller, often described as a white cross on a red field. The Maltese cross, an English pointed cross, the iconic symbol of the Knights Hospitaller after they moved to Malta. And the cross pate, a straight-armed cross used by the Templars and early Hospitallers. While the straight St. George cross became specifically associated with England, its roots as a Crusader symbol connected to the broader Knights Hospitaller tradition. So those are two ancient places that would have had symbols like this at those times and been using them to say that this is what they represent, right? And we all kind of know that from like, your chivalric, identities, and everybody has a coat of arms and all that kind of stuff. And so it's interesting that this became the one that represented England, right? That's what's, makes it unique in that way for them, right? Whereas you have other versions of it in other places. But those two orders represent like a specific perspective on the story of St. George, even at that time. And we already have the idea of St. George and a dragon. And I just want to put a pin in that so that we can keep remembering that as we continue on, because I'm going to go into some other orders that have used this type of symbolism, just to make sure that I'm sort of crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's. So, what is the Order of the Garter? The most noble order of the Garter is an order of chivalry founded by King Edward III in 1348. The most senior order of knighthood in the British honour system, it is outranked in precedence only by the decorations of the Victoria Cross and the George Cross. The Order of the Garter is dedicated to the image and arms of St. George, England's patron saint. Appointments are at the sovereign's sole discretion, typically made in recognition of national contribution, service to the crown, or distinguished personal service to the monarch. Membership of the order is limited to the sovereign, the Prince of Wales, and no more than 24 living members or companions. The order also includes supernumerary knights and ladies, example, members of the British royal family and foreign monarchs. And I printed it off. Okay. The order's emblem is a garter circlet. There we go. With the motto, Honi soit qui mal y pense, Anglo-Norman for shamed be he who thinks evil of it. In older translations, evil be to him who thinks of evil. In gold script, and members of the order wear it on ceremonial occasions. So that's their emblem. Those are like, that's the knights in the British royal house. That's their symbol, right? The Knights of the Garter. If you don't know the story, the legend associated with it, it was that a lady's garter, a strap, had fallen on the floor when she was in the presence of, the king and his court, and somebody laughed at the lady. And the king said, "Shame be upon him who thinks evil of it," saying that you shouldn't have bad thoughts about a lady for wearing her garments. And if one should happen to fall and that's an embarrassing thing, the embarrassment is on the person who points it out and feels embarrassed. It's not on the lady, because she's just being a lady and doing the things that normally happen with the lady. And it was kind of like a moment of recapturing, some grace or decency in the moment. And that's what they chose to use to represent and fight for. So the legend goes, right? I just think that that's a nice story. What is the connection, if any, between St. George's Cross and the Order of the Garter? The Order of the Garter, founded by King Edward III in 1348, is officially dedicated to St. George as England's patron saint, making him the St. George's Cross its central emblem. The red and white cross appears on the Garter badge, the mantles of its officers, and its spiritual home is St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Key connection and usage examples. Patronage. The order is officially known as the Most Noble Order of St. George, or Society of the Garter, connected to the Order of St. George's status as the patron saint of soldiers. Symbolism in dress. Members and officers wear dark blue or red mantles, cloaks, featuring the St. George's Cross shield. Insignia. The Garter Principal King of Arms wears a badge of office showing the royal arms mixed with St. George's Cross surrounded by the Garter. Ceremonial location. The order holds its annual service at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Appointment day. New appointments are traditionally announced on St. George's Day, April 23rd. The Lesser George. A pendant representing St. George on horseback slaying the dragon is worn as part of the insignia. Synonyms related associations. Most Noble Order of St. George, Society of the Garter, Company of the Garter, College of St. George, the administrative body of the chapel. The order was formed to create a group of knights dedicated to God, the Virgin Mary, and St. George, merging religious devotion with elite chivalry. So, what is Rosicrucianism? It's the Order of the Rose Cross. Rosicrucians are members of a worldwide esoteric brotherhood, often referred to as the Order of the Rose Cross, that studies ancient mystical, philosophical, and scientific traditions to achieve personal and spiritual transformation. Emerging in the 17th century Europe, they blend Hermeticism, alchemy, and Christian mysticism to understand the metaphysical laws of the universe. Core beliefs and practices. Secret wisdom. They believe in holding hidden ancient knowledge, passed down, often seeking to reform society and understand the mysteries of nature. Self-development. The path focuses on individual evolution, self-reflection, and personal pilgrimages rather than public dogma. The Invisibles. Historically, they were known as invisibles because they were famously hard to find, a fact that added to their reputation. Symbolism. The symbol of the rosy cross, a cross with the rose at the center, represents the merging of spiritual rose and physical cross aspects of life. Not a religion, while they were often revere Christ and as a profound teacher or prophet, rather than solely a theological figure, Rosicrucians are considered a mystical tradition, not conventional Christian denomination. Origins and Groups. The Manifestos. The movement was formed on 3 pamphlets published in Germany between 1614 and 1617, Fama Fraternis, Confessio Fraternitatis, and The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, which told the story of legendary founder Christian Rosenkreutz, which that means Christian Rosy Cross. I don't necessarily know if he was a person, right? Modern groups. Today, multiple groups exist, including the ancient mystical order Rosicrucius, which is the largest, and various initiatory groups such as the Societas Rosicruciana. While some members study and work within other organizations like Freemasonry, the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, others are independent, operating on a philosophical New Thought basis. What is the connection, if any, between the St. George's Cross and Rosicrucianism? The connection between the St. George's Cross, a red cross on a white background, and Rosicrucianism lies primarily in the shared symbolism of the red cross as a marker of spiritual transformation, chivalry, and esoteric Christianity. While the St. George Cross is historical, heraldic emblem often linked to Crusader knights, Rosicrucians adopted the red cross or rose cross as a symbol of the soul's development and the chemical wedding of lower and higher natures. Key connections: the Red Cross Knight. In the Rosicrucian Manifesto, specifically the chemical wedding of Christian Rosencrantz, the protagonist, Christian Rosencrantz, is initiated as a Red Cross Knight, a title directly linked to the movement to the chivalric crusader symbolism of St. George. Symbol of divine light. In Rosicrucian, Hermetic, and Masonic traditions, the Red Cross is interpreted as a symbol of divine light or the universal or cosmic Christ. This is often tied to St. George as a representative of the Knights Templar and the Knights of the Round Table, Red Cross Knight of Holiness. The Order of the Garter. Some interpretations suggest that Rosicrucian initiation mentioned in their text is similar to the initiation into the English Order of the Garter, which is dedicated to St. George, whose heraldic symbol is the Red Cross of St. George. Rose and Cross Symbolism. The Rosicrucian symbol, a rose at the center of a cross, is interpreted by them as a perfected being, where the cross represents the human body and the rose represents the unfolding soul. The Red Cross of St. George is often considered the foundation upon which the spiritual rose blooms. Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. This 19th century English Masonic society, which has direct roots in Rosicrucian traditions, operated in a cultural landscape steeped in English heraldry and the imagery of St. George. Legendary origins. Some legends, such as those mentioned in Masonic history, attempted to connect the rose cross emblem to early Christian order initiated in 46 AD, whose symbols were later adapted by early Christian chivalric orders, including those connected to St. George. And just for fun, who are some famous Rosicrucians? Famous individuals historically associated or rumored to be Rosicrucians include philosophers and scientists like Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, René Descartes, and Gottfried Leibniz. Other notable figures linked to the movement included Paracelsus, Benjamin Franklin, Victor Hugo, Claude Debussy, and Eric Satie. These figures were often linked due to their involvement in science, esotericism, or arts. And here's a list. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's there if you want, you know. And one more before we go back to the books, I'm sure. What connection, if any, is there between the Red Cross Society and older orders? There's no direct historical or organizational connection between the modern Red Cross Society and older esoteric orders such as Rosicrucianism. I'm going to skip just because I don't want to keep us here forever. It's the same for the all instances of essentially the use of the Red Cross for the Red Cross organization. Although I would say that the people throughout history who have been people of science, people of medicine, learning, trying to understand the human body and all that stuff, and why this symbol is used sometimes in medicine, right, is because of that connection going down between those orders over time. I know that they were created at separate times for different reasons and the whole thing, but I still think that there are connections symbolically why they chose these things. So now we're going to get into the other versions of St. George. So far we've read the Golden Legend version. I thought that I had... Oh no, I have it here. Here we go. So I have another story of St. George here for us tonight. This is from the book Legendary Ballads. Just a little peek at the from my dear daughter, Christmas 1908. It looks like Helen L. Kennedy. Legendary Ballads. And the very first one is our old boy, St. George. I'll show you the picture first. St. George spearing the dragon. Okay. So this is now 16th century, a couple hundred years after this, even. Okay. St. George and the Dragon. Of Hector's deeds did Homer sing, and of the sack of stately Troy. What griefs afar Helena did bring, which was Sir Paris's only joy. And by my pen I will recite St. George's deeds, an English knight. Against the Saracens so rude fought he full long and many a day, where many giants he subdued in honor of the Christian way. And after many adventures past, to Egypt land he came at last. Now, as the story plain doth tell, within that country there did rest a dreadful dragon, fierce and fell, whereby they were full sore oppressed, who by his poisonous breath each day did many of the city slay. The grief whereof did grow so great throughout the limits of the land, that they their wise men did entreat to show their cunning out of hand, what way they might find, might this fiend destroy, that did the country thus annoy. The wise men all before the king this answer framed incontinent, the dragon none to death might bring, by any means they could invent. His skin more hard than brass was found, that sword nor spear could pierce or wound. When this the people understood, they cried out most piteously, the dragon's breath infects their blood, that every day in heaps they die. Among them such a plague it bred, the living scarce could bury the dead. No means were there, as they could hear, for to appease the dragon's rage, but to present some virgin clear, whose blood his fury might assuage. Each day he would a maiden eat, for to allay his hunger great. This thing by heart the wise men found, which truly must observed be, wherefore throughout the city round a virgin pure of good degree was by the king's commission still taken up to serve the dragon's will. Thus did the dragon every day untimely crop some virgin flower, till all the maids were worn away, and none were left him to devour, saving the king's fair daughter bright, her father's only heart's delight. Then came the officers to the king, that heavy message to declare, which did his heart with sorrow sting. She is, quoth he, my kingdom's heir. O let us all be poisoned here, ere she should die, that is my dear. Then rose the people presently, and to the king in rage they went. They said his daughter dear should die, the dragon's fury to prevent. Our daughters are all dead, quoth they, and have been made the dragon's prey. And by their blood we rescued were, and thou hast saved thy life thereby. And now, in sooth, it is but fair for us, thy daughter, so should die. O save my daughter, said the king, and let me feel the dragon's sting. Then fell fair Sabra on her knee, and to her father dear did say, O father, strive not thus for me, but let me be the dragon's prey. It may be for my sake alone this plague upon the land was thrown. 'Tis better I should die, she said, than all your subjects perish quite. Perhaps the dragon here was laid for my offence to work his spite, and after he was sucked my gore, your land shall feel the grief no more. What hast thou done, my daughter dear, for to deserve this heavy scourge? It is my fault, as may appear, which makes the gods our state to purge. When I ought die, I stint the strife, and to preserve thy happy life. Like madmen, all the people cried, Thy death to us can do no good. Our safety only doth abide in making her the dragon's food. Lo, here I am, here I come, quoth she. Therefore do what you will with me. Nay, stay, dear daughter, quoth the queen, and as thou art a virgin bright, that hast a virtue famous been, so let me clothe thee all in white, and crown thy head with flowers sweet, an ornament for virgins meet. And when she was attired so, according to her mother's mind, unto the stake then did she go, to which her tender limbs they bind, and being bound to stake a thrall, she bade farewell unto them all. Farewell, my daughter dear, quoth she, and my sweet mother meek and mild, take you no thought or weep for me, for you may have another child. Since for my country good I die, death I receive most willingly. The king and queen and all their train, with weeping eyes, went then their way, and led their daughters there remain, to be the hungry dragon's prey. But as she did their weeping lie, behold, St. George came riding by, and seeing there a lady bright, so rudely tied unto a stake, as well became a valiant knight, he straight to her went, his way did take. Tell me, sweet maiden, then quoth he, what caitiff thus abuseth thee? And lo, by Christ his cross I vow, which here I figured on my breast, I will revenge it upon his brow, and break my lance upon his chest. And speaking thus whereas he stood, the dragon issued from the wood. The lady did first espy the dreadful dragon coming so, and to St. George aloud did cry, and willed him away to go. Come here comes that cursed fiend, quoth she, that soon will make an end of me. St. George then looking round about, the fiery dragon soon espied, and like a knight of courage stout, against him most fiercely ride. And with such blows he did him greet, he fell beneath his horse's feet. And with his lance that was so strong, as he came gaping in the face, in that mouth he thrust along, for he could pierce no other place. And thus within the lady's view, this mighty dragon straight he slew. The savour of his poisoned breath could do this holy knight no harm. Thus he saved from death, and home led her by the arm. And when King Ptolemy did see there was great mirth and melody. When that valiant champion here had slain the dragon in the field, to court he brought a lady fair, which to their hearts much joy did yield. He in the court of Egypt stayed, till he most falsely was betrayed. The lady dearly loved the knight. He counted her his only joy, but when their love was brought to light, it turned unto great annoy. The Morocco king was in the court, who to the orchard did resort, daily to take the pleasant air. For pleasure's sake he used to walk. Under a wall he oft did hear St. George with Lady Sabra talk. Their love he showed unto the king, which to St. George great woe did bring. Those kings together did devise to make the Christian knight away, with letters him in courteous wise, and straightway sent to Persia, but wrote to Thespiæ to kill him, to kill, and treachery his blood to spill. Thus they for good did him reward with evil, and most subtly, by which vile means they had regard to work his death most cruelly. Who, as through Persia land he rode, with zeal destroyed each idol god, for which offence he straight was thrown into dungeon dark and deep, where he thought his wrongs upon, he bitterly did wail and weep. Yet like the knight of courage stout, at length his way he digged out. 3 grooms of the king of Persia by night this valiant champion slew, though he fasted many a day, and then away from thence he flew on the best steed the Sophy had, which when he knew he was full mad. Towards Christendom he made his flight, but met a giant by the way, with whom in combat he did fight most valiantly a summer's day, who yet for all his bats of steel was forced the sting of death to feel. Back over the seas with many bands of warlike soldiers soon he passed, vowing upon those heathen lands to work revenge, which at the last, ere thrice 3 years was gone and spent, he wrought unto his heart's content. Save only Egypt land he spared, for Sabra, bright her only sake, and ere for her he had regard, and meant a trial kind to make. Meanwhile the king o'ercome in the field, unto St. George did quickly yield. Then straight to Morocco's king he slew, and took fair Sabra to his wife, but meant to try if she were true, ere with the wound that ere he would lead his life, and though he had her in his train, she did a virgin pure remain. Towards England then a lovely dame the brave Sir George conducted straight, a eunuch who came with them, who upon the lady wait. These 3 from Egypt went alone. Now mark St. George valour shown. When they in the forest were, the lady did desire to rest. Meanwhile St. George to kill a deer for their repast did think it best, leaving her with the eunuch there, whilst he did go kill the deer. But lo, in his absence came 2 hungry lions fierce, and fell, and tore the eunuch on the same, in pieces small, in truth to tell. Down by the lady then they laid, whereby they showed she was a maid. But when he came from hunting back, and did behold his heavy chance, then for this lovely virgin's sake his courage straight he did advance, and came into the lion's sight, who ran at him with all their might. Their rage did him no whit dismay, who, like a stout and valiant knight, did both the hungry lions slay, within Lady Sabra's sight, who all the while, sad and demure, stood there like a virgin pure. Now St. George did surely know this lady was a virgin true. His heart was glad, and erst his woe, and all his love did soon renew. He set her on a palfrey steed, and towards England came with speed. And that's the end, I believe. Oh, wait. Where being in short space arrived unto his native dwelling place, therein with his dear love he lived, and fortune did his nuptials grace. They many years of joy did see, and led their lives at Coventry. Now that's interesting. So, who was the St. George that settled in Coventry? According to 16th century legend, St. George, the patron saint of England, was born and lived in Coventry, specifically associated with Cauldron Castle or Calden Castle in the Wyken area. The story is largely credited to author Richard Johnson, who, in his 1596 book, The Seven Champions of Christendom, claims St. George was born in Coventry to Lord Albert and was later associated with local legends. The Tale of St. George of Coventry, features a medieval romanticized version of the 3rd century Roman knight. Right? So they don't think that those two things are connected, right? But we still have the story of St. George and the dragon. And so we're almost here. We're almost at the end of the presentation. So we've got one more St. George to look at. This is what is known as a Ripley scroll. And it's a picture of the scroll. This is the full scroll and the end. It's a bit small, but it starts at the top with a picture of the alchemist working with his bottle where he refines things, and it shows the steps that he has to go through. It comes down here. You've got more symbols and instructions about the tree of life in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And then you have a section with the red line and the green line, and there's a dragon. And you've got this picture of Hermes, which is associated with gold, and these raindrops of blood coming down here to this symbol, and the dragon that's bleeding. And at the bottom, you have a picture of a little man. It's supposed to be a picture of the author named George Ripley, supposedly. This is a Ripley scroll. Right? Sir George Ripley was an Augustinian canon of Bridlington in Yorkshire who lived from about 1415 to 1495 and one of England's most famous alchemists. He is best known for his work The Compound of Alchemy, which is dedicated to Edward IV in 1471. There were a lot of fables created around his name, especially ones that included stories of his life, studies, achievements, and even his professed death. The myth around him sparked after he published works Liber Duodecim Portarum, 12 Gates leading to the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone in 1471. Ever since, his works have been studied by major personalities, alchemists, and scientists of the history, such as Dr. John Dee, Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, and more. On the left, George Ripley, as illustrated in the 16th century edition of the Ripley Scroll. And so the book has all of the pictures. Of the scroll in detail, the alchemical steps, right, of the Philosopher's Stone that was supposedly the clue that would turn any base metal into gold. Right. Here is the last of the red and the beginning to part away the dead, the elixir of life. With those two. The blood of Hermes and the bleeding dragon. right? I'm not going to go through the full book. I'm just going to talk about here. What is dragon's blood in gold refining? In the context of historical alchemy and gold refining, dragon's blood is an evocative name for a liquid form of gold derived by dissolving the metal in aqua regia, a mixture of nitric acid and hydrochloric acid. The two lions that were on the page that I just showed you represent those two acids. And the dragon's blood, St. George slaying the dragon and becoming royalty by marrying the princess of either Egypt or Ethiopia or Libya or wherever it happened. At some point in history, there was somebody who figured out how to purify gold, which meant that they learned how to purify all the other metals as well. Kind of like gold is one of the final bosses for them. They figured it out, right? It also has to do with the story of the sword and the stone, right? How do you get a sword out of the stone, right? And so that's what we're going to read next time. I'll read the first gate, which talks about the philosopher's stone. This is in his works, right? But that would be the reason why I think you would have this symbol for this long across that many organizations or that much of history, and why people want to still associate themselves with it today. He's like the original hero that figured out how everything worked. This George, this earth worker who figured out how to turn simple metals into gold by slaying the dragon. This is what they're talking about. That's St. George and the Dragon, right? They even used to do mummers plays of St. George and the Dragon, and St. George is always kind of shown as a bit of like a fool kind of character, kind of like the fool and the flying ship or something like that. Those stories, it's like everything always works out for him, and he can do no wrong, and so he's kind of treated as a bit of he's not too smart, right? Kind of an interesting aspect of, it's like the Monty Python-esque aspect of British comedy and culture, right? It's like we've had that for so long, that goes so far back, right? Of having that kind of funny comedy character to, have fun with when you're doing the play or whatever. But they've been doing this play. They've been doing like cultural representations of this thing for like hundreds, if not thousands of years now, right? The last two things that I'm going to share with you are some anecdotal evidence, you could say. In the Chinese culture, there are 9 sons of the dragon, the Jade Dragon, right? Or the Jade Emperor, right? And in Chinese mythology, the 9 sons of the dragon are not dragons themselves, but hybrid creatures, each with distinct characteristics, preferences, and symbolic roles, often used in architecture and art. Based on Ming Dynasty traditions, these 9 sons are Bizi, Shiwen, Pulao, Bian, Chaozi, Gongfu, Yazi, Sunani, and Xiaofeng, right? And each one of them is different, right? Like Bizi resembles a turtle. If you've ever seen the dragon that has like a turtle shell in Chinese art or architecture or anything like that, symbolism, that's what that is. And one of these stories about that dragon, right, is a story where the dragon eats all of the emperor's gold and silver, and the emperor punishes it. Is going to be a little bit on the TMI side. He seals its bum shut so it can't defecate out the gold and silver. And it's a possible association with the metal mercury, because when you mix mercury, the liquid mercury like you would used to have in those puzzles or like thermometers, right? When it touches gold, it absorbs the gold. So then you need a method to get the gold back out again. You can use it to clean. You can also use it to refine. That's the important part. And that's why mercury, cinnabar, the red and white ore is so important, right? But this is another cultural tradition with dragons that seems to follow the same pattern. And there's a video game that I've even played. I don't have a copy of it on me right now because it's lost in a box somewhere, but the Okami video game, which centers on a legend where a hungry dragon who demands human sacrifice in the form of a maiden is slain by removing each of its 8 heads. Both of these stories point to a possible connection of the story of St. George to an even more ancient version of the story that crosses many cultures, right? And so anywhere in the world that you look, actually, and you find traditions that have such things as dragons, you may find these connections. There are many forms of cultural art, like Khan plays in Thailand, that also have to do with like birds or eagles or dragons eating snakes. That's another, killing the dragons. You're always slaying the dragons, right? So St. George and the dragon. Who is St. George? Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything that I possibly have on St. George at the moment. I know that there's more that I could get into at some point, but I hope you guys enjoyed that little talk. I'll leave you with just some more symbolism that I'm sure most of you will know if you already know all this stuff. But I have the flags here anyways, so I thought we would do it anyways. But you guys may recognize this red cross as being the same red cross that's on this flag. And it is the same cross. This section with the white and the red cross, that's the St. George's cross still, right? What they did is they combined, there's 3 flags at least here, if not 4. England and Wales, possibly the white and the red, right, was already a country before they introduced the other 2 flags. The other 2 flags, St. Andrew's Cross for Scotland, my namesake, right? Andrew, right? That's this white cross on the blue field, right? And the red diagonals are from the cross of St. Patrick. So when you look at this flag, you're looking at the cross of St. George, the cross of St. Andrew, and the cross of St. Patrick all at once. That's what this flag is. I just thought that that would be interesting for people who aren't familiar with that reference. They also take on a connotation of north, south, east, and west, and then these being the things that point you in the directions in between those things, the things that guide you. It's like Jesus is always the thing that you measure yourself against, and these are the mental directions that you can go in, or physical in the real world too. So that's where I'll leave us with. I wish everybody a happy St. George's Day, and hopefully you guys found that interesting. And yeah, join me again next time when we will go into the first of Ripley's 12 Gates, just for fun. Because if you found this at all interesting, I think you'll find going into the Philosopher's Stone stuff as well even more interesting. So we'll see you guys next time. And if you like that, leave a like, comment, subscribe, share all the fun stuff. But yeah, happy St. George's Day, guy. We'll see you next time.